Welcome to Topics with Indu and Sneha, a podcast of The Turtle. Indu is a mom, an educator and scholar, and a lifelong New Yorker. Sneha is a mom and a certified yoga instructor in Charlotte with a background in Hindu studies. Every episode, we start with something happening in real time and noodle on it together, because that's what we do. Our conversations draw on our research and our lives, and sometimes we stumble into new aha moments. These aren't polished takes, they're real conversations. We're two Hindu-American women making sense of a chaotic world. If you've been looking for a Hindu-American feminine perspective on what's happening around us, this might be your kind of podcast. So grab your chai and join us.
Hey, how's it going?
All right. How are you? What's going on over there? What you been thinking about?
Okay, so we're diving right into topics here.
Mm-hmm.
So last week we had talked about assimilation and some of the issues that are happening around immigration and all that. But interestingly, this topic just keeps giving. So we saw a bunch of chatter and we thought we'd dive into the idea of assimilation. So the first thing we saw was that pastor. He was on Alex Stein's show, and he basically brought back this old accusation against Hinduism that it's about demon worship, right? It's like really fun how these things come back in cycles. And so we're seeing that a lot now, and especially on the far right. And then we also saw article from Shadi Hamid in the Washington Post, which talked about assimilation in the context of American history. And he was basically arguing that he was arguing in terms of Muslims, but I think this applies to Hindus too, that there should be no requirement for Muslims to assimilate and that they should be free to live in the way that works for them. And there was he made some good points. I'm really reducing it because we're going to talk more about this, but he made some good points that there's a historical element to American history was that it was founded by these groups of Christians who were fleeing persecution in various parts of Europe. And the deal they made was that they would be allowed to essentially practice the way they want, and they weren't going to internally fight with each other, and they would just found their own little societies around the country. There were some interesting responses to that we also saw on Twitter as well as on other platforms like Glenn Lowry's response. So I think we should dive into that.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff in there. I agree. I thought his essay was really thought-provoking and thoughtful and raised some really interesting, it surfaced some interesting concepts that I don't think we talk about enough. One of the observations he made, and I noted that he was observing only the 3 Abrahamic traditions, but he talks about how assimilation essentially is secularization. So
yes.
Assimilation is like a code word for sort of shedding the things about religion or these specific religions that make them what they are. And then he goes on to describe, and correct me if I'm wrong, he goes on to describe this idea of rejecting Sharia law would mean rejecting the essence of Islam. And so how can you ask a Muslim to do that? And says, we have a right to believe these things about, gender, sexuality, etc. That's our religious freedom to believe these things. But I thought it was interesting that he wasn't denying the core role that Sharia law plays in the perspective of Muslims. I also appreciated that, and you and I have talked about this, how he treated religion as a set of ideas and perspectives and not an ethnicity or an identity category, right?
Yes. Yeah. No, all those observations are, that aspect of his work I really relate to because he's been in the sort of Bloomberg type consultancy type role for a long time. And actually he had wrote a book on early, I think it was 10 years ago, maybe more. He wrote a book about how this idea that the West has that there will always be progress and progress will look like, essentially Western modernity in every single country. And he wrote a book which basically argued against that position, that actually Islamic nations weren't going to do that. And his main point was that even when people can, especially in democracies, people who practice Islam are going to vote for things that are. And so I thought that, so you can see the progression, how he's applying that thesis to the United States.
Well,
Yeah.
and he also surfaces very interestingly, again, something we talk about, but I don't think it's spoken about enough, especially in the progressive left. The value he's appealing to the conservative right when he's talking about these quote unquote values that are central to the Muslim tradition, right? I mean, these are his words, not mine. And so he's kind of making a case that, well, these values already exist. They just, may look or sound different. But it's interesting because the left doesn't necessarily appreciate those values when they're shared by people who are white or Christian conservatives, but somehow they have tolerance for it when it comes from a category they see as minoritized. Again, because they treat religion as an ethnicity or an identity category as opposed to a held set of beliefs or perspectives, right?
Yeah.
Which I think is really fascinating. The part that I think, like, I would love for us to pull back a little bit is that while his piece does a good job of arguing for the case of not secularizing, it does seem like a will you or will you not assimilate argument, as opposed to what will help, what aligns with the nature of American discourse and society, right? And so I think there's a difference between assimilating and making one's perspective legible.
Yeah.
And so this goes back to this like demon worship thing, right? We all know that these perspectives on Hinduism are absurd interpretations of what we do, right?
Yeah.
These are not honest descriptions of Hinduism. So if we're talking about the marketplace of ideas of religions, that only works if what's being considered are honest representations. And representing Hinduism as demon worship is not an honest representation, intellectually honest representation
Yeah.
of our tradition, right? Um, and so some of the conversation I hear I saw on social media is like, well, we either need to assimilate and shed these things that don't make sense in the US, or like don't succumb to it. So sort of the other perspective. But what about actually having honest conversations about what it is that we're doing? Like, what do we consider to be the source of life? What is the Hindu perspective? Not just at a thin level of how does it appear, but at a very thick level, like at a rich, deep level. What is it that how are we framing life and our role in the world?
I think partly it's that what the even the I like what is the definition of assimilation? Like when I find myself like discussing this with people, or I'll observe like a Twitter throwdown, and what I see is that people are just actually not norming on one definition. They're not actually arguing for the same position. Like their idea of what assimilation is looks very different depending on who you ask. And so for the right, it just seems like assimilation means not being Hindu anymore, being white, being Christian, essentially. And again, going back to your point that the left doesn't understand this because they think in terms of ethnicities and races and not ideas and belief systems and knowledge traditions. It's like they're just arguing past each other is what I usually see, because they actually have very different ideas of what assimilation looks like. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, when you were just talking, it reminded me of an exercise I used to do with my fifth graders when we studied the ancient, like Mayan, Aztec civilizations. And when we just talked about culture in general, I would ask my students to list everything that has to do with like culture. And then as they named them, I would put them into these three columns, but I didn't label what the columns were. And they had to figure out, what are these categories? And so essentially it was, what are the most obvious manifestations that you might see? For instance, if you're traveling and you visit another country, what are you seeing? You're seeing art and language and food and architecture and sort of representations. And then beneath that, you see the institutions. So you might have a government that looks a certain way, or an economic system, or other things. But beneath all of that are actually the philosophical and ontological drivers. Like, how are we actually thinking about people in society? Those are sort of the core values of the society. And I think that's where we're missing the conversation. We're sitting at like the most superficial level when we're talking about assimilation, but we're not actually talking about compatibility of core values. And how can a society function? This is not a rhetorical question. How can a society function if the core values and the ways in which we even think about what it means to be human are not necessarily compatible? How can we even know if that's what we're talking about if we're stuck at the sort of most superficial layer of like what is most obvious to us?
Yeah. And I think the right and even the left to like a large extent is very focused on those external expressions of ethnicity as religion, and they're not diving deeper. Like what the right really gets offended by is like people doing car puja, vahana puja, right? Like I'm like, why does that bother you? Like I'm not coming over to your car, right? I'm just doing my own thing. So it's the external expression of it, but it does matter. That external expression still matters because that means that you can show up authentically in like your like workplace or schools or that does have an impact, but
It does. No, I'm not suggesting it doesn't, but I'm saying that people interpret those external things not based on the core values of the tradition itself, but based on their understanding of things from a completely different
yeah,
philosophy, right?
yeah,
So that takes us back to this demon worship. And I'm actually about to write something about this for the turtle. So I'll dig into it a little bit more. But you and I have talked about this, the idea of meditation in schools, right?
yeah,
And the pushback against it in the conservative Christian parts of the country have been that, well, A, it's Hindu, so they acknowledge that it comes from a different tradition. But B, they call it devil worship or demon worship. And from our perspective, we're like, wait, hold on a second. Meditation is the practice of turning inward to come into contact with or have an experience of one's true nature. So, like, would you like to tell the class what it is that's going? Like, are you okay? Like that's what comes up for me. It's like, are you
Are you
guys
are
okay?
you inside like are you inwardly a
Is
demon?
that what you believe? Is that deep inside? Right? So the outward manifestation is meditation, but their interpretation of it reveals
Yeah,
a concept of the source of the self that, and I'm saying it like very lightly, but and I honestly don't know enough, and I don't know that every Christian would say that, but the people who
yeah,
are, that's what it sounds like to us Hindus. And we're like, hold on a second. For us, the source is love. The
yeah.
source is like pure
But I
consciousness where
do
we're all
think
connected.
maybe there is a ontological I do think there's like a ontological thing about that because depending on the tradition, um, there's a dualism, right? So the God is external to you. So looking inward is like not looking towards God. I always wondered that. I'm not
Yeah.
100%. I'm not saying that
Well,
that's what it is, but I'm just kind of
yeah. Again, I don't know enough, and I want to have these conversations without it being read or received as an offense because I genuinely want to understand.
yeah,
Because to us, it doesn't make any sense. We're not, meditation is not the same as prayer,
yeah,
right? And of course, the Hindu concept of God is different than the concept of God for these folks. But we're not saying if you meditate, you're praying to our God versus your God. We're saying it's meditation, it's turning inward. And if you think that the origin of life is sin, that's
yeah.
your belief. We think that inside, deep down inside, is just pure ananda. Like it's just bliss and love. That's the source of all of this stuff around us. So where does the devil come to play there? That's it just, I mean, honestly, again, I'm not saying this sarcastically. It makes me really sad that that's the interpretation. But I would also love to be able to have these conversations in a real way.
With Christians, yeah, I think that would
Yeah.
be really interesting how and I think we might find that different denominations even understand this very differently, right?
Yeah. I mean, certainly there are Christians who meditate, right? I mean, we know people who are practicing Christians who are a part of the art of living who
Yeah.
practice pranayama, all of these things, and they don't find any disconnect between what they're doing and their faith, nor are they encouraged to disconnect from their faith. It all works together. So obviously it's not universal, but the point here being, I'm not even suggesting that our religion is better than another religion, but that it's distinct. This thing brings up something where it's very, very distinct. And so while there might be cries about devil worship or demon worship, unless we like look beneath the hood to understand why people are saying that, what it is that they're talking about, we can discuss it at the surface level of you're insulting us. But I don't actually think that's going to help us in terms of a pluralist society. It's not simply like, the people who are pushing back against this without understanding what Hinduism is might simply be defending our right to worship the devil without actually understanding what it is that we're doing, right? They might say, well, they're allowed to worship however they want without understanding that they still have not advanced their comprehension of what Hinduism is. And I think
Yeah.
while it might not be our job to educate people about our religion, I think American society only benefits from learning from its diversity. That's the I don't know, that's the advancement of assimilation to something more sophisticated.
Well, I think the model of there was a tweet that you shared, and that writer, the author, she said she made a really good point that there should be some core values that we all agree upon. For example, freedom of speech,
Mhm.
nonviolence towards one another, that sort of thing. I don't think any of the traditions, whether Abrahamic or indigenous or Hindu or anything, would actually have a problem with that. So if that's assimilation, I think that would be fine. Though I do think that if you look at how certain like denominations of Islam and Christians even have reacted to any criticism, basically they have actually shut down freedom of speech. Who was that? The writer I'm thinking about. He unfortunately got attacked. He was like he wrote Children of Midnight, Indian author, Indian Muslim author. He wrote
Salman
like
Rushdie?
yeah, Salman Rushdie, yeah. So that I think the sort of extreme elements of certain Abrahamic traditions have actually attacked
Yeah.
freedom of speech. So if we can agree that that's not okay in America or even in like other parts of the world, and we can take criticism and actually discuss it, I think that could be a model
Yeah.
for assimilation. But I don't think it can be like the you can't offend can't be a model, I think.
No, and I would say that because of the differences in our constitutions, immigrant Hindus from India often use that language of "you've offended us"
Yeah.
because that's protected under the Indian Constitution, right? But it's not here. So that sounds like an attack on freedom of speech in the United States, where it's like, you can't say that. And it's like, well, no, as Americans, we can say everything. To me, I would love freedom of speech for us to really embrace it in the way of curiosity and discourse, to be able to ask the question, like, well, tell me more about your tradition and how it's compatible with the core values as outlined in our Constitution. I would like to understand the relationship between those things. I would love to be able to be in an interfaith space where it's not about tolerance, and the conversation is not reduced to like platitudes about how essentially all religions are the same, because they're not. They're not
I know.
actually the same, and that's okay, right? It's good. We want diversity. We want diversity of thought. But I think it's healthy for everyone to have real conversations about these things. I saw a tweet today that talked about the danger of an ideology is that you don't understand the limitations of your own ideology. And it's kind of like they compared it to body odor, like you can't tell if you smell bad or not, which I thought was an interesting metaphor. But I think it's helpful for us to understand these. And I say this recognizing that there's, depending on who you talk to within even our community, you're going to get different responses about all of these things. There's diversity of thought within the community
Yeah.
itself.
Yeah.
But I think both of us, we've discussed this a lot, are a little bit done with the extremes of like shed everything and make it look American, or hold on tight. And this country is like, don't look around and understand, and don't try to make this legible to the people around you.
Yeah.
I think neither of those extremes is particular. I mean, people are free to choose those if they want. I don't know that it's necessarily helpful long term.
Well, I don't think the model that the Hindu community is sort of dominantly chosen to do, though there's pockets of, differences, obviously, depending on where you live and all that, is that we form like enclaves, cultural enclaves. We're very comfortable. We become very comfortable in those. And then we have very rich lives within that enclave, but nobody understands us outside of that. Like the only thing they know about us is that we're IT people and doctors. Like that's what they know about us. And you see that in the mainstream media. But every Hindu kid I know is engaged in some form of art, something. They're like making presentations for the community. They're like performing concerts and art performances, like whether it's Bharatanatyam or Odissi or Karnataka or Hindustani or, folk, Marathi. Like there's something that all these kids are involved in that is deeply culturally and rooted in Hinduism and is beautiful, but we don't share those selves with the wider public. So even teachers, like I'm going to go present on Carnatic music at my daughter's school, and the teacher didn't know what Carnatic music was, even though like about 5 of the 17 kids in my daughter's classroom are South Indian. So because that area is just very South Indian. And so that is like, very sad to see. So that's a clear indication that we're just forming these bubbles and we're not talking to each other. And I do wonder like what happens when our community isn't so first gen. Like do these art forms that we've brought over from India, do they thrive? Do they what happens to them like, down like to the third, fourth generation, right?
Yeah. Well, and the work it takes to effectively communicate and convey the meaning and the significance of something like art that appears on the surface to be very different to, I mean, right now to non-Hindus, but eventually to second, third, fourth gen Hindus, that effort, that's what makes things grow and blossom and thrive, not dogma, not you have to do this, and certainly not isolation. That effort and that skill in doing that effectively,
Yeah.
there's a lot to be gained in that space, right? I mean, I think we both recognize there's a difference between showing up in your kid's class and putting on a 55-minute PowerPoint presentation with the pedagogical model of throw spaghetti on the wall and see what sticks, and then 5 minutes for Q&As, and the kids at the end of it, the presenter might feel like, oh, well, we're all listening, but what did they actually take away from that, right? So really thinking about how do we do these things? How do we communicate these things effectively? How do we have it make meaning? How does it resonate, right? When you teach younger children how to read, you gauge their reading comprehension not by their ability to repeat back to you what they read, but there are 3 types of connections they make: text to text, so they're connecting it to other things they've read. Are they connecting it to the world around them, or are they connecting it to their own lives? So text to text, text to world, and text to self. So similarly, when we're sharing something about our culture in a classroom, are we checking with the kids to see, are they connecting it to something they already know or
Yeah.
something they see around them? Because that's what's going to make it stick in their lives, rather than let's go impress them with which, yes, it's very impressive. I'm not saying that it's not impressive, but what's going to actually stay with because these presentations matter. Like they actually really, really do matter, not just for our children when we show up. A few years ago, one of my childhood classmates told me that she remembers my mom coming into the classroom in first grade, which is 1981. She says this on Facebook in 2021. She's like, I still remember your mom coming in her sari and the presentation she did, right? Like this stuff sticks. There's something sticks. So what is it that we're going to make stick?
Yeah.
Is it how exotic it is? Is it something random? Or are you going to land it with something that actually really is meaningful for the kids in the
Yeah.
class? And to me,
Yeah.
that's that work of making what we do relevant, even if it's not the same, but having it have meaning or be meaningful or significant in the lives of the people around us. Like that's deep assimilation work.
Yeah. That is, yeah. We're not like just blindly adopting another group's traditions and knowledge systems, but we're actually like finding ways to like be in the ecosystem. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think the simplest way to think about it is if you were to make a new friend who comes from a different background, what do?
Yeah.
You talk to each other, you understand each other, you learn about each other's values and traditions and like how you make decisions and what's important. And right, like it's so simple to understand assimilation when you think about it in terms of a friendship, a cross-cultural friendship, right?
Yeah.
I don't know, I think there's this fear, and there, of course, there are models of assimilation that are complete shedding your entire culture and everything about you in the
Yeah.
hope that you'll be accepted into mainstream society. But as you said, that's just one definition of assimilation. That doesn't have to be how we hold it.
Yeah. No, I think that's what a certain group in the United States would like it to be. And they don't recognize that that's not obvious to every single person. And it needs to be, I mean, I think we need to surface that, right? And also,
Yeah.
um, I don't, I guess, I think there is something to be said that their traditions themselves teach them to be like distrustful of non Christians. But there's also work that we can do to help that. Like I think some of the stuff that like Vivek Ramaswamy has been doing actually helped. Because he get goes to all these like turning point things, and he gets like really like attacked, right? Like we feel the sort of like the hostility, but then he's very calm and he responds in a way. I don't always agree with his politics, but it's
I
effective
mean,
in that forum.
I don't always agree with how he talks about Hinduism either, and that's fine.
Yeah,
He's allowed to think of it however he wants, but he definitely makes it sound like Christianity in order for it to be
does.
accepted.
He
So, like,
does.
I'm like, okay, if that's your version, that's what you're doing. If that
Yeah.
brings you satisfaction, but it doesn't sound like Hinduism to me.
Yeah. Yeah. But I will say he makes it very Christian, but he is clear about his ontological position, which I always appreciate. There's like that one place where he's like holding
Yeah,
the ground,
yeah.
that he is, he believes that there's divinity everywhere. So I think that is really, at least that's something. So that's why I think he got one question where there was a Christian and he was accusing him of like using Christian language to sort of like hide his Hinduism or something, like be deceitful and using the language of love and everything. And his response was good. Like he was like, yeah, but I genuinely believe that everybody, comes from love, and that it doesn't matter whether we pray to Jesus or Krishna or whoever. And because I see divinity in all. So, I think that is, whatever little he's doing, I think it does help.
Yeah, I mean, everyone chips away at this in
Yeah.
different ways. I think it's fascinating that that person's argument is that Christianity somehow has a trademark on the language of love.
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
part of the good news package.
Yeah.
Yeah, that I just find it hysterical. Like, are people not curious? Like, is that what they actually believe? Like, do they think that other people don't have that? I don't know. I'm always bewildered by the lack of curiosity.
There's genuinely, I face that a lot here in the South. There's just actually a genuine lack of curiosity. You will get into situations where you'll be like, yeah, I follow, like they'll say something and then it's like something like, we want to avoid sin, something to that effect. And then I'm like, well, we don't really believe in sin and I'm Hindu. And then like the conversation just shuts down. They don't have any questions anymore.
Yeah. Well,
And then,
and which is why when someone is curious, right? Sometimes the response, especially from like the progressive side, is like, I shouldn't have to do the labor of whatever. And I'm like, you know what? If nobody does the labor, we're never going to understand each other. If someone is genuinely curious and I have the energy or the whatever,
yeah.
I'm going to take the time because someone is curious,
Yeah.
right? Like,
But also it's
even
your
like,
dharma, right? Like
yeah,
you're put in a situation where somebody came to you and asked you a question. And I think as long as the question's intention is genuine curiosity,
hmm,
and you should, I think you've written about this, intention matters, I think,
yeah,
in that situation. But
yeah.
yeah, you're right. Like the left's response is, I'm not going to do the labor. Like,
Yeah, well, if no one's doing the labor and it's just like, well, I have a right to be different. It's like, okay, cool. How are we ever going to become friends then? Like, how are we ever going to have a really good, happy, thriving society
yeah,
if we're just all in our like righteous bubbles with our right? Like this focus on we have rights and our rights are very important. I think that's come into glaring focus in the recent years, but our responsibility and the role we can play, I think, in softening these spaces of misunderstanding. Obviously, not in extreme situations like this pastor that showed up in this podcast. I don't know how much curiosity that gentleman has, but I don't think much is to be gained by generalizing from there about all Christians or all pastors or all Americans or all assimilation differences. Like learning how to read the room, learning how to understand our own mind and
skills.
what's happening around us.
Yeah. Yoga is skill in action.
Yoga is skill in action.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that definition, but it's like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah. Skill
Um,
in action, but also like obviously the skill in action doesn't come without clarity of mind,
yeah.
right?
So you have to, yeah, I think that's an important thing you're touching on. That it's not just about putting yourself in situations, also like having that sadhana to be able to like navigate these situations in the best way. And sometimes the response is, oh, I'm actually in danger. I need to get out of here.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Yeah.
or there's no point in arguing with this person. That's also okay.
I think also when we're dealing with folks who are genuinely operating from fear, right? They've been told to be afraid of people and ideas and gods that are different from theirs, right? Doing deep sadhana like calms the environment around us. Like we have like
Yes.
an aura. Like it's
Yeah.
there's a like our prana is not just ours, it serves everyone around us and it can de-escalate the sort of vibrational regis that emerges from that fear of difference. I think that opens up curiosity, that opens up the mind
Yeah.
really nicely,
Yeah.
not just in us, but in those around us. So those deep practice, as opposed to going in hot into a situation ready to debate.
Yeah.
If the goal is to win the debate, I mean, I don't know. Sometimes debates, I've never understood the goal of winning a debate. Like it's the
Yeah.
self-satisfaction of winning it, but what does that do? It's not like, and then understanding spread like magical waves across the country and everyone agree. Like people can't even agree on who won the debate a lot of the time, right? If the goal is to bring people closer together and greater understanding of each other, that's that like the way you operate in that space is very different than winning a debate. And all of these
Yeah.
things are
No, I think so there's certain things I've come to appreciate about like, like that Oxford debate format.
Mhm,
But who is it? Not Sam Altman. He's like the atheist guy, but he was talking about what the purpose of that sort of format is and
mhm,
that that's not appropriate for every different format. So what that format does is that it allows you to explore like here's an idea and what is the extreme application of this idea. It like reveals like you can
mhm,
pull apart the implications of whatever you're doing. Like he gave an example where it was like, in a hospital, you want to save 5 people, and the only way to save that person is like to take the life of a child. Would you do it? Right. And
mm,
if your idea is like utilitarianism, so you can pull apart that
mhm.
idea to its extreme. And so you can understand like where are the limits, where are the boundaries of that? Like how far do you take that? So in that way it's useful, but I think people have lost that. And so now we're doing this on Twitter and it's not working.
Twitter is not meh. Twitter is like that's not real debate, right? That's just
Yeah.
chest thumping and like I don't even know,
But also like
provocation.
people inviting other people to debate them on podcasts. It's like, what is the point of that?
I think the ego gets very satisfied from that. But I mean, my goal is, and I think yours as well, is to bring people together,
Yeah.
um, and like actually explore not just like the ideas of Hinduism, but actually explore how the application of Hinduism can benefit all, how it helps us be, for lack of a better term, useful instruments of the divine in the world. And we can't
Yeah.
that's not an intellectual endeavor. That's actually
Yeah.
being out in the real world. And I think for sure being moms, for me as an educator, for you as a yoga instructor, like we're out there interacting with people in the real world. It's very different than Twitter. It's
Yeah.
very different than a podcast. You're coming across not just the words or ideas of the person in front of you, you're coming across their energy. You can get a sense of what's happening in their whole lives, their whole self as a person. There's so much more happening in people. And I don't know, I just find it so reductive, those spaces to be so reductive and self important and revealing. It's interesting data. But the
Yeah.
conversation around assimilation has to be grounded in the real world. Theories are just, there's a theory for every person out there, right? Like
Yeah.
you said, there's not even a single definition of assimilation. But if the goal is harmonious society, right? Not everyone singing the same note, but everyone singing different notes that go with each other to create a harmonious society. That's going to play out very differently in different regions of the country than any one expert anywhere, and I include myself in this, can theorize about.
Yeah.
And I think like the example you brought up of the arts and culture is a really powerful way to communicate all of that.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Arts are like I mean, from our civilizational perspective, we've always seen the arts as the primary way of communicating like very difficult ideas that
Yeah.
exist in like the Upanishads and the Vedas and stuff. I mean, that was the whole purpose of like the Natya Shastra. So we should embrace that, but then like we should also like look at how that can apply in society that we live in. Like, how do
Yeah.
we talk to issues that are in society through art?
Well, and I think we both include architecture in that, including temple
Yes.
architecture. But I think we have
Yes.
a lot more to gain by taking one temple and teaching people the significance of the temple and putting resources into educating our own community and the people around us about what all of this means, the deeper core values, the metaphysics of all of it, then using those resources to build more temples.
Yes. Yes. We
Uh,
have a lot of temples. We're very good at creating lots of temples.
hmm.
We need them. I like the model of was it the New York, upstate New York temple, where
The
they were
teaching temple.
teaching temple. I thought that was really, really cool. And we saw that there were people there from other parts of the country. Uh, so people just came because they wanted to actually learn about,
Yeah.
um, you know, Shri, uh, Shri Sadhana. So that I thought that was really good.
Yeah.
So we can do so much.
I mean, even the concept of a temple, I don't think many Hindus understand what, like,
Yeah.
the temple as technology, what the temple is, right? It's
Yeah.
not just a structure. It's not like a god museum. It's not, right? And it's not about, it is about aesthetic, but not in the sense of, what's the word? It's not like the more is better, right? Like there's divine design of the temple, and
Yeah.
that is beyond what pleases it pleases us at the most surface level. And the space of the temple, of course, is to bring us in deeper
Yeah.
into closer to our core, ourself. It's like the design is so exquisite, like the theory of design behind it and the ways in which temple architects and artisans work. It's so beautiful to slow down and actually document that, to make that legible within the community and beyond.
Beyond, yeah.
I think just slowing down and doing things more thoughtfully rather than trying to, like, go big with
Yeah.
it, I think could do so much. So much.
Yeah, I definitely think if more funds were directed towards creating like educational programs that are doing community outreach and also just like educating within the community, because you're right, it's not visible even within the community. I think
Yeah.
that would be really helpful. Um, and like help us actually assimilate within the community.
Yeah. And also help us understand and reframe what assimilation actually means, right?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think when people use the word assimilate, oftentimes they're talking about a sense of belonging, right? Like, do you belong here? Do I belong here? What constitutes belonging? And I think that belongingness
Yeah.
might be a more helpful North Star than, because assimilation just has so much baggage around it.
Yeah.
I think this idea of belonging evokes not just right, but responsibility, right?
Yes.
If you're in a home that feels like your home, you take care of it. No one has to ask you,
Yes.
right? You
Yes.
clean something up, you wash the dishes, you help prepare the meals, you take care of it. You want to make sure it's okay because you belong there. If someone makes you feel like you don't belong there, you're not
Yeah.
going to necessarily take care of it in the same way either. So I think this idea of belonging sits at a much deeper level than all of this sort of baggage wrapped around assimilation.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree. Yeah.
Are we done with topics?
Okay, done topics.
Done topics.
That's all for this episode of Topics. Thank you for staying with us. If today's conversation sparked something for you, we'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment and let us know what topics you'd like us to explore next. If you're enjoying the show, please like and subscribe on YouTube so we can keep bringing you our insights. We also go deeper into these topics in writing over on our Substack. Head over to our Turtle publication on Substack for deep dive articles that pick up where the podcast leaves off. Links are in the description. See you next time.